Harper Vance threw her $5,000 silk blazer onto the Italian leather sofa. The view of Seattle through the floor-to-ceiling windows was spectacular. But tonight, the bright lights of the city just felt like a headache. She kicked off her heels and let out a long, heavy breath. "That bad?" Jordan asked. He was standing by the kitchen island, already pouring her a glass of water. "Worse," Harper said, rubbing her temples. The guy didn't even wait for the appetizers to ask if Vance Corr was looking for a new venture capital partner. He wasn't on a date, he was on a pitch meeting. "That's 3 this month," Jordan noted. 3 for 3. "I'm tired of being a walking bank account, Jordan. Every time I put on a dress and sit in a 5-star restaurant, I'm just inviting people to lie to me." She walked toward her massive walk-in closet, but she didn't go toward the rows of designer dresses or the custom-tailored suits. She went to a small cardboard box tucked away in the very back corner. "What are you doing?" Jordan asked, following her to the doorway. "I'm changing the variables," Harper replied. She pulled out a pair of light-wash jeans with frayed hems and a hole in the left knee. She tossed them onto the bed. Next came an oversized gray hoodie. It had a faint, brownish coffee stain on the right sleeve that she'd never bothered to wash out. "You're going to meet Caleb Miller looking like that?" Jordan looked at the clothes, then back at Harper. "Arthur said this guy's a decent man. He's a craftsman. He might actually be different. That's exactly why I'm doing this. If he's different, he won't care. If he's like the others, he'll see the stain and the messy hair and find a reason to leave within 10 minutes. It saves everyone time." Harper stripped out of her expensive silk blouse and pulled the rough denim over her legs. It felt strange but liberating. She pulled the hoodie over her head and caught her reflection in the full-length mirror. She looked nothing like the CEO who had graced the cover of Forbes last quarter. She looked like someone who had just spent the day deep cleaning a garage. She grabbed a hair tie from the vanity and pulled her blonde hair into a loose, haphazard bun. A few strands fell into her face, and she left them there. No makeup, no jewelry, not even her watch. "You look relatable," Jordan said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Are you sure about this? It's a bit extreme." "Is it? Last week I had a guy tell me he loved my ambition while he was literally eyeing my Patek Philippe. I'm done with it." She pulled on a pair of old, scuffed Converse sneakers that had seen better days. "If he can't handle a stain on my sleeve, he can't handle my life, Jordan. Let's see who Caleb Miller really is." "He's waiting at the Rusty Cup in Capitol Hill," Jordan said, checking his phone. "It's a divey place. At least you'll blend in." "Good. Don't call the driver. I'm taking an Uber X. I don't want a black Suburban pulling up to a place like that." Harper grabbed her cracked phone, the one she kept specifically for things like this, and headed for the elevator. As she descended from her penthouse, she felt a surge of nervous energy. It wasn't the kind of nerves she felt before a board meeting. It was the thrill of being invisible. The Uber arrived 5 minutes later. The car smelled like pine-scented air freshener and old upholstery. Harper sat in the back seat, staring out at the Seattle rain. She watched the luxury boutiques of the downtown core fade away, replaced by the more lived-in, grit-covered streets of the hill. As the car pulled onto the block where the coffee shop was located, Harper saw the neon sign for the Rusty Cup flickering through the drizzle. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of charcoal she had taken from her art kit earlier. "Wait, just a second," Harper told the driver as he pulled to the curb. She looked into the small hand mirror in her bag. She took the charcoal and rubbed it against her fingertip, then smeared a light streak of black dust across her left cheekbone. It looked like she'd accidentally wiped her face with a dirty hand. "You okay back there?" the driver asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Perfect," Harper said. She tucked the charcoal away and zipped her bag. She stepped out of the car and into the cool, damp air. She didn't check her hair. She didn't straighten her hoodie. She just shoved her hands into her pockets and walked toward the entrance of the coffee shop. Through the glass, she could see a man sitting in a corner booth, hunched over a sketchbook, with a little girl sitting beside him. Harper took a breath, felt the smudge on her face, and pushed the door open. The bell above the door chimed, announcing her arrival to the room and to the man who was about to be put to the test. The door to the rusty cup swung open with a heavy creak, and Harper stepped into the warmth. The smell of old floorboards and burnt espresso hit her immediately. She pulled her oversized hoodie tighter around her, feeling the damp Seattle air clinging to the fabric. She looked toward the back corner, her heart doing a nervous skip as she spotted the man Arthur had described. Caleb Miller was sitting at a small, scarred wooden table. He didn't have a laptop open, and he wasn't checking a smartphone. Instead, he was leaning over a sketchbook, a black coffee in one hand and a green crayon in the other. A young girl sat beside him, her tongue poking out in concentration as she colored a lopsided tree. Harper took a breath and adjusted her thick, plastic-rimmed glasses. She felt the smudge of charcoal on her cheek and the coffee stain on her sleeve. This was the moment. She walked toward the table, deliberately fumbling with the strap of her bag. As she got closer, she let her old, heavy keychain slip through her fingers. The keys hit the floor with a loud metallic clatter. "Oh, no. I'm so sorry," Harper said, bending down awkwardly. Before she could reach them, Caleb was already moving. He slid out of the booth with a fluid, easy grace. He picked up the keys and held them out to her. As he stood, Harper noticed he was wearing a simple flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that were tanned and scarred from years of manual work. "Don't worry about it," Caleb said. He handed her the keys and gave her a small, genuine smile. "I've dropped my hammer enough times to know that things just have a way of hitting the floor." He didn't look at the stain on her hoodie. He didn't stare at the smudge on her face. He looked directly into her eyes, and for a second, Harper felt like he was seeing past the glasses and the disguise. "Thanks," Harper said. "I'm a little bit of a disaster today." "We all have those days," Caleb replied. He pulled out the chair across from him. "I'm Caleb. You look like you've had a long commute in this rain. Can I get you a hot latte? That would be amazing. I'm Harper. I'll be right back." "Maya, say hi to Harper." The little girl looked up from her sketchbook. "Hi, I'm Maya. I'm 6. "Hi, Maya. That's a very green tree you're drawing," Harper said as she sat down. Caleb walked toward the counter, and Harper watched him go. He moved with a quiet confidence that was different from the aggressive energy of the men she usually dealt with. He didn't seem to be trying to impress anyone. He was just a guy getting coffee for a woman who looked like she'd had a rough morning. Maya leaned across the table. "You have dirt on your face." Harper touched her cheek. "Do I?" "Oh, I was cleaning earlier. I guess I missed a spot." "It's okay. My dad gets sawdust on his face all the time. He says it's the sign of a good day's work." "Your dad is a smart man." Caleb returned a few minutes later with a steaming paper cup and set it down in front of Harper. He slid back into his seat and took a sip of his black coffee. "Arthur told me you work in the city," Caleb said. "I do. I work in facilities, maintenance and cleaning, mostly. It's a lot of hours and not a lot of thanks. I get that. I spend my days in a wood shop. Most people just see the finished table. They don't see the hours of sanding and the splinters that go into it. It's hard work, but there's a certain peace in it." Harper took a sip of her latte. It was creamy and hot, exactly what she needed. "You don't mind the splinters? The splinters heal. It's the boring days behind a desk that I couldn't handle. I tried it for a few months years ago. I felt like I was wilting. I need to build things with my hands. I understand that feeling. Some days I just want to scrub everything until it's new again." Maya tugged on Caleb's sleeve. "Dad, can she see the bird?" Caleb looked at Harper. "Maya thinks every new person needs to see her drawing of the hawk we saw at the park." Maya flipped the page and showed Harper a sketch. It was surprisingly good for a 6-year-old, capturing the sharp beak and the spread of the wings. "That's beautiful, Maya. You're quite the artist." Dad helped with the legs. "Legs are hard. Legs are definitely the hardest part," Harper agreed. She looked back at Caleb. "So," Arthur said, "you've lived in Seattle your whole life?" "Mostly. I spent some time out east, but the mountains kept calling me back. There's something about the rain here. People complain about it, but it keeps everything green and quiet." "Do you like the rain, Harper?" "I used to hate it. I thought it was just messy. But today I think I'm starting to appreciate it." Caleb leaned back, his eyes searching hers again. "It's a good day for a fresh start, even if it's a rainy one." Harper felt a strange warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. She had come here expecting a rejection or a polite excuse to leave. Instead, she was sitting with a man who looked at her messy bun and her stained hoodie and saw a person worth talking to. For the first time in years, Harper wasn't the CEO of Vance Corp. She was just a woman named Harper, having coffee with a man who didn't want anything from her but her time. "I think you're right," Harper said. "A fresh start sounds perfect." "I hope you're right about that fresh start," Harper said, taking another sip of her latte. "Sometimes it feels like the city just wants to keep you in the same spot, no matter how hard you try to move." Caleb nodded, looking down at Maya's drawing for a moment, before meeting Harper's eyes. "The city can be loud and crowded, but it doesn't decide who you are. Usually, the world gives you exactly what you're looking for. You just have to be ready to see it when it shows up." "I'm trying to be ready," Harper said. Before Caleb could respond, the heavy front door of the coffee shop swung open. The quiet atmosphere of the shop was instantly shattered. A cloud of expensive, floral perfume drifted across the room, clashing with the scent of roasted coffee. Harper didn't even have to look up to know that the people walking in didn't belong in a place like the Rusty Cup. A man in a custom-tailored navy suit and a woman carrying a designer handbag that cost more than Harper's first car walked toward the counter. They looked like they had just stepped out of a high-end office building downtown. The man stopped mid-stride. He squinted toward the back corner of the shop, his eyes landing on Caleb. A slow, crooked grin spread across his face. "No way," the man said. "Caleb Miller? Is that actually you?" Caleb's posture changed instantly. He didn't tense up, but the relaxed ease he had shown just seconds ago vanished. He set his coffee cup down on the table. "Hello, Brad," Caleb said. Brad walked over to the table, his polished leather shoes clicking loudly on the old wood floor. The woman, Tiffany, followed him, her eyes scanning Harper with a look of pure confusion. Brad didn't wait for an invitation. He leaned over the table, his body language aggressive and condescending. He raised his left arm and deliberately tapped his gold Rolex against the scarred wooden tabletop. The metallic clink sounded sharp in the quiet shop. "I haven't seen you since that real estate gala 3 years ago," Brad said. "I heard you walked away from everything to play with wood in some dusty garage. I thought people were joking, but here you are." Caleb kept his voice level. "I didn't walk away from everything, Brad. I just decided to spend my time on things that actually matter." Brad let out a sharp, mocking laugh. He turned his attention to Harper. He looked at her messy bun, the charcoal smudge on her cheek, and the coffee stain on her hoodie. He didn't hide his disgust. "Caleb? My man? Is the woodworking business so bad you're dating the janitor crew now?" Brad asked. Tiffany stepped up beside him. She pulled her phone out of her pocket and pointed it toward the table, as if she were about to take a photo for a social media post. She looked at Harper like she was an exhibit in a museum. "Oh my God, Brad, stop!" Tiffany said. She giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. "Maybe she has a great personality under all that grease. Is that a coffee stain? Or did you just come from scrubbing a floor?" Harper felt a surge of familiar anger rising in her chest. In her other life, she would have stood up and dismantled a man like Brad in 30 seconds. She would have called his boss or made sure his firm never got another contract in Seattle. But right now, she wasn't the CEO of Vance Corp. She was a woman in a stained hoodie, and she had to stay in character. Under the table, Harper sipped her hands into tight fists. She squeezed so hard her fingernails dug into her palms. She kept her head down, pretending to be intimidated, but her mind was racing. "She's a friend, Brad," Caleb said. His voice was still calm, but there was a new edge to it. "And we're having a private conversation. You should go get your coffee and head back to whatever meeting you're running late for." Brad didn't move. He leaned in closer to Caleb, lowering his voice. "Come on, Caleb. Look at her. Look at this place. You used to have potential. You were the guy everyone wanted to hire. Now you're sitting in a dive shop with a woman who looks like she hasn't showered since Tuesday. What happened to you, man? I grew up, Caleb said. You should try it sometime. Tiffany stepped closer to Harper, leaning down to get a better look at her face. Seriously, what is that on your cheek? Is that coal? Do you work in a furnace? Harper didn't look up. She focused on the steam rising from her latte. She could feel Caleb's eyes on her, and she wondered if he was embarrassed. Most men would be trying to distance themselves from her as fast as possible. Dad, why is the man being mean? Maya asked. Her voice was small but clear. Brad looked down at Maya as if he had only just noticed she was there. He gave her a fake, plastic smile. I'm not being mean, kiddo. I'm just giving your dad some career advice. He's clearly forgotten how the world works. My dad builds houses, Maya said. He says he makes things that last. He says people like you only make noise. Brad's smile twitched. He stood up straight and adjusted his tie. He looked back at Caleb, his expression turning cold. You're teaching her well. I see. Teaching her to be just as stagnant as you are. We're done here, Brad, Caleb said. He stood up slowly. He wasn't a small man, and when he stood to his full height, he towered over Brad. Take your Rolex and your girlfriend and go. Now. Brad held up his hands in a mocking gesture of surrender. All right. Don't get your flannel in a twist. I just thought I'd say hi to an old friend. Clearly, you've found your level. Tiffany tucked her phone away, giving Harper one last sneer. Good luck with whatever this is. Maybe you can find a hoodie that actually fits at the Goodwill down the street. They turned and walked toward the counter, laughing as they went. The shop felt strangely quiet once their perfume started to fade. Harper didn't move. She kept her hands clenched under the table, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was waiting for the apology. She was waiting for Caleb to say how sorry he was for their behavior, or worse, for him to look at her with the same judgment Brad had shown. Caleb sat back down. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. He reached across the table and gently tapped Harper's arm. Harper? You okay? She slowly unclenched her hands and looked up at him. I'm fine. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. I know I don't exactly look like the kind of person your friends would approve of. Brad isn't my friend, Caleb said firmly. He's a man who thinks he's winning because he has a shiny watch and a title. He doesn't know the first thing about what makes a person valuable. He looked at the smudge on her cheek and then at her eyes. He didn't look away. You don't need to apologize for anything, Caleb added. People like Brad look at the surface because they're afraid to look any deeper. They might see a stain on your hoodie, but I see someone who's been working hard. There's no shame in that. Maya leaned over and patted Harper's hand. Don't listen to them. Tiffany smells like a flower shop that died. It gave me a headache. Harper let out a small, shaky laugh. The tension in her shoulders began to melt. Thanks, Maya. I think I have a headache too. Caleb smiled at her, and this time it was a look of pure solidarity. Let's get out of here. This place suddenly feels a little crowded. Do you want to see my shop? It's not far, and I promise there are no guys in Rolexes allowed. I'd love to see it, Harper said. As she stood up to follow them, Harper realized that her plan was working better than she had imagined. She had filtered out the shallow world of Brad and Tiffany, and in the process, she had found someone who didn't care about the filter at all. She followed Caleb out into the Seattle drizzle, feeling more like herself than she had in years. Tiffany's high-pitched laugh lingered in the air as she and Brad turned toward the counter. Brad took a slow, mocking step back, his eyes still fixed on Harper with a look of pure pity. Harper kept her head down, staring at the scarred wood of the table, feeling the heat of frustration prickling at the back of her neck. She was used to people like Brad. In the boardroom, they were the ones who talked over everyone else until she shut them down with a single sentence. But here, in her oversized hoodie and charcoal-smudged face, she had no title to protect her. She was just a woman being bullied in a coffee shop. Caleb didn't start a shouting match. He didn't stand up and shove Brad or make a scene that would get them kicked out. Instead, he reached across the table. He moved slowly, deliberately, and placed his hand directly over Harper's clenched fist. His skin was rough. It was covered in thick calluses and tiny, faded scars from years of handling saws and sanding down rough timber. His hand was large enough to cover hers completely, and it was incredibly warm. The steady weight of it was like an anchor, pulling Harper back from the edge of her anger. Caleb looked up at Brad. His expression wasn't angry. It was something much more intense, a terrifying, quiet calm that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the small corner of the shop. "Brad, this is Harper," Caleb said. His voice was low and steady. "And she's exactly where she needs to be. We're busy here, so unless you're buying a drink for everyone, find another table." Brad opened his mouth to deliver another insult, but he stopped. He looked at Caleb's eyes, then at the way Caleb was protectively holding Harper's hand. The smug grin on Brad's face wavered. He tried to maintain his arrogant posture, but he shifted his weight uncomfortably. He recognized that Caleb wasn't playing a game. "Whatever, man," Brad muttered, waving a hand dismissively. "I was just trying to help you out. If you want to waste your time, that's on you. Come on." "Tiffany, this place smells like old grease anyway." Tiffany rolled her eyes and followed him toward the door. They didn't even wait for their drinks. The bell above the door chimed as they stepped back out into the rain, leaving a heavy silence behind them. Harper sat frozen. She didn't pull her hand away. For the first time in years, a man had stepped in to protect her without knowing a single thing about her net worth. He didn't know she was the CEO of Vance Corp. He didn't know she could buy the entire block if she wanted to. To him, she was just a woman who had been insulted by a jerk, and he had stood up for her simply because it was the right thing to do. "They're gone now," Caleb said. He gently squeezed her hand before pulling his back. He picked up his coffee like nothing happened. "Sorry, you had to deal with that. Brad has always been a lot of noise with very little substance." "You didn't have to do that," Harper said. Her voice was a little shaky. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Caleb replied. "I know nobody deserves to be spoken to like that, especially not by someone like him." Maya, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the confrontation, pushed her sketchbook across the table toward Harper. She pointed to a new drawing she had been working on while Brad was talking. It was a bird, tucked into a nest, its wings folded tight against its body. "Look at this one," Maya said. "My teacher said some birds don't look fast when they're on the ground. But that's because they have their wings hidden under their feathers. You're like this bird, Harper. You have wings under your hoodie. They just can't see them yet." Harper felt a lump form in her throat. She looked at the drawing, then at the little girl's serious face. "That's a very nice thought, Maya. Thank you." "Maya sees the best in people," Caleb added. "It's a good trait to have. Keeps you from getting distracted by things like Rolexes and fancy suits." "I should probably go," Harper said, suddenly feeling overwhelmed by the sincerity in the room. "I don't want to keep you from your day." "We're heading to my shop," Caleb said. "I have a few pieces I need to finish sanding before Monday. You're welcome to come by if you want to see what a real woodworking mess looks like. It's a lot noisier than this place, but the coffee is better." Harper hesitated. She had a mountain of emails waiting for her back at the penthouse. Jordan was probably wondering where she was, but the thought of going back to her cold, perfect office felt exhausting. She wanted to stay in this world a little longer, the world where hands were rough, drawings were made with crayons, and people were defended for no reason at all. "I'd like that," Harper said. They walked out of the coffee shop together. The drizzle had turned into a steady rain, the kind that made the Seattle streets look like they were made of gray glass. Caleb led them to an old, beat-up truck parked a block away. It was covered in a fine layer of sawdust and smelled like cedar. "It's not a limo," Caleb said, opening the passenger door for her, "but it gets us where we need to go." "It's perfect," Harper said, climbing inside. The drive to the Ballard neighborhood was short. They passed rows of warehouses and small industrial shops. Caleb pulled up in front of a building with a large wooden sign that read, "Miller's Timber." Inside, the shop was filled with the scent of fresh-cut wood and oil. Stacks of lumber leaned against the walls, and a large workbench sat in the center of the room, covered in tools that looked like they had been used for decades. There was a small corner with a rug and a desk where Maya immediately sat down to continue her drawings. "Make yourself at home," Caleb said. He walked over to a large piece of oak that was clamped to the bench. "I usually put on some music when I work. Do you mind?" "Not at all," Harper said. He turned on an old radio, and a soft folk song filled the room. Caleb picked up a piece of sandpaper and began to work on the edge of the oak. He moved with a steady, rhythmic pace. He didn't try to fill the silence with small talk. He just worked. Harper sat on a stool nearby, watching him. She noticed the way he focused on the wood, his eyes searching for imperfections. He treated the oak with a kind of respect that she rarely saw in her world. In the tech industry, everything was about speed and moving on to the next thing. Caleb was doing the opposite. He was taking his time to make something that would last. "Why do you do it?" Harper asked after a while. "The woodworking, Brad made it sound like you had a different life before this." Caleb stopped sanding. He wiped a layer of dust off the wood. "I was an architect. I spent 60 hours a week staring at a computer screen, designing buildings I'd never actually touch. I made a lot of money, but I was miserable. Then Maya's mom passed away, and I realized I didn't want my daughter growing up watching a father who was always stressed and never present." He looked over at Maya, who was humming to herself while she colored. "So I bought this shop," Caleb continued. "I make less money, and my hands stay dirty, but I get to see my daughter every day. I get to build things that people will sit around for 20 years. To me, that's a better deal." Harper nodded. She thought about her own life, the endless meetings and the constant pressure to grow the company. She had everything she was supposed to want, yet she was sitting here in a disguise because she was lonely. "I think you made the right choice," Harper said. Caleb looked at her, his gaze lingering on the charcoal smudge on her cheek. "I think so too. And I think those wings Maya talked about, I think they're there. You just have to decide when you're ready to use them." Harper didn't know how to respond to that. She just watched him go back to work, the sound of the sandpaper filling the room like a steady heartbeat. For the first time in a very long time, Harper Vance felt safe. She felt seen, not for her money or her power, but for the person sitting on a stool in a dusty woodshop. As the rain hammered against the tin roof of the shop, Harper realized she didn't want the afternoon to end. She wanted to stay right here, in the sawdust and the folk music, with the man who had become her silent shield. The folk music on the old radio eventually faded into the steady sound of the rain hitting the shop's tin roof. Caleb put down his sanding block and looked at the clock on the wall, then back at the oak table he had been working on. He wiped his hands on a rag and turned to Harper. "It's getting late," Caleb said. "I should get Maya home for dinner, but let us walk you to the bus stop first." "You don't have to do that," Harper replied. "I can find it. It's a few blocks away, and the streetlights in this part of Ballard are a bit hit or miss. We're heading that way anyway." Harper nodded, even though her stomach twisted. Jordan was waiting 2 blocks away in the black SUV, likely checking his watch every 30 seconds. She had to make sure Caleb didn't see the car, or the professional driver who was paid to wait for her. She followed Caleb and Maya out of the shop, the smell of fresh cedar still clinging to her gray hoodie. The rain was light, a typical Seattle drizzle that felt more like a mist. They walked down the sidewalk, passing rows of industrial buildings and small warehouses. Caleb walked on the outside, keeping Maya and Harper away from the puddles near the curb. "Is the bus ride long for you?" Caleb asked. "About 40 minutes," Harper lied. "It gives me time to think. I used to take the light rail every day back when I was at the firm. I thought I liked the quiet time, too. But after a while, I realized I was just using it to dread going into work and then using it to recover on the way out. That sounds exhausting." It was. Now, my commute is a 5-minute drive in a truck that smells like a forest. It's a lot better for my head. They reached the bus stop, a small glass shelter that was cracked in one corner. Harper looked down the street, hoping the D-line bus would show up before Jordan decided to drive around the corner to look for her. "I forgot to give you this," Maya said. She reached into her small backpack and pulled out a piece of paper. It was the drawing she had been working on back at the shop. She handed it to Harper with a serious look. Harper took the paper. It was a crayon drawing of the 3 of them standing in the wood shop. Maya, had drawn Harper in her oversized hoodie and glasses, but right on top of Harper's messy bun, Maya had added a small, bright yellow crown. "A crown?" Harper asked. "It's a secret one," Maya said. "Like the stories Arthur reads me. The people who are the most important usually don't wear their crowns on the outside. They keep them hidden so they can see who is actually nice to them." Harper felt a sharp pang of guilt. She looked at the drawing, then at the smudge on her cheek that she had purposely put there to deceive them. She was a CEO hiding in a world of honest work, and this little girl was accidentally describing her entire life. "I think Maya has a big imagination," Harper said. Caleb looked at the drawing, and then at Harper. "Maya's a good judge of character. She sees things people like Brad missed a long time ago. I'm just a person at a bus stop, Caleb." "Maybe. But Maya doesn't draw crowns for everyone. She didn't draw one for Tiffany, I can tell you that much." Harper looked away, her eyes landing on the headlights of a bus approaching in the distance. She felt like a fraud. These people were offering her genuine kindness and protection, and she was giving them a carefully crafted character. Part of her wanted to tell him right there. She wanted to say her name was Harper Vance, and that she lived in a penthouse and ran a company. But then she looked at Caleb's calm face and the way Maya was holding her hand. If she told them now, the peace would vanish. Caleb would look at her the way he looked at Brad, like she was part of a world he had worked very hard to leave behind. She wasn't ready to see that look in his eyes. "The bus is here," Harper said. "Get home safe, Harper," Caleb said. "I will. Thank you for the coffee. And the shield. Anytime. I'll be at the shop most of next week. If you ever need another escape from the city, I might take you up on that." Maya stepped forward and gave Harper a quick, tight hug around her waist. "Don't lose your crown, Harper. I'll keep it safe, Maya. I promise." Harper climbed onto the bus and took a seat near the back window. As the doors hissed shut and the bus pulled away, she watched Caleb and Maya walk back toward the woodshop. Caleb had his arm around Maya's shoulders, and Maya was skipping, her backpack bouncing with every step. Harper waited until the bus moved 3 blocks away before she stood up and pulled the cord to signal a stop. She hopped off at the next corner and walked quickly toward the intersection, where Jordan was waiting. She saw the black SUV idling near a fire hydrant. Jordan stepped out as she approached, his suit looking sharp and out of place against the gritty Ballard Street. He opened the back door for her. "You're an hour behind schedule, Harper," Jordan said. "I was starting to think I should call the police." "I'm fine, Jordan. Just drive." Harper sank into the soft leather seat of the SUV. The silence of the luxury vehicle was a stark contrast to the rhythmic sound of Caleb's sandpaper. She looked down at the crayon drawing in her hand. The yellow crown looked bright against the gray paper. "What's that?" Jordan asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Nothing," Harper said. "Just a reminder." She folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into the pocket of her hoodie. She didn't want to go back to the penthouse. She didn't want to look at the spreadsheets or the merger plans. She just wanted to go back to the shop where a stain on her sleeve didn't matter and a little girl could see a crown behind her glasses. For now, she would keep her secrets. She wasn't ready to break the only real thing she had found in years. The morning after the bus ride, Harper found herself staring at the sleek, white ceiling of her penthouse. The silence of her apartment felt heavy and empty. She kept Maya's drawing on her nightstand, and every time she looked at the yellow crown, she felt a pull back toward Ballard. 2 days later, she was back in her oversized hoodie and stained jeans, stepping out of an Uber 3 blocks away from Miller's Timber. As she pushed open the heavy wooden door, the smell of pine and oak hit her. It was a sharp, clean scent that immediately made the tension in her neck disappear. The shop was busy. The sound of a handplane scraping across wood filled the air. Caleb was leaning over a workbench, his hand resting over Maya's as they moved a small block of wood over a sheet of sandpaper. They didn't notice Harper at first. "Keep it flat, Maya," Caleb said. "If you tilt it, the edges won't stay sharp." "My arm is tired," Maya replied. "Just 10 more strokes. Then we can check the finish." Harper stood by the door for a moment, watching them. Caleb's patience was different from anything she saw at her office. He wasn't checking a clock. He wasn't rushing her. He was just present. Need a hand with the cleanup? Harper asked. Stepping further into the shop, Caleb looked up, and a genuine smile broke across his face. You're back. I figured the bus ride might have scared you off for good. It takes more than a long commute to scare me, Harper said. She grabbed a wide push broom leaning against a stack of oak planks. I'm pretty good with a broom. I won't say no to that. Sawdust has a way of getting into every corner by noon. Harper began to sweep. The rhythmic motion was therapeutic. She pushed the piles of fine wood dust toward the center of the floor, moving around the heavy machinery. Maya finished her 10 strokes and ran over to show Harper the wooden block. Look, Harper, it's a heart. Well, it's going to be a heart once Dad helps me with the round parts. It's very smooth, Maya. You did a great job. I'm going to paint it purple, Maya announced, before heading back to her little desk in the corner. Harper continued sweeping, but her eyes wandered toward the back of the shop. A large piece of furniture sat under a bright work light. It was a tall cabinet made of dark walnut. She leaned her broom against a post and walked closer. She expected to see something simple, like the basic tables Caleb had mentioned. Instead, she found a masterpiece. The grain of the wood was matched perfectly across the doors. The joints were tight, almost invisible. There were delicate inlays of lighter wood that formed a subtle geometric pattern. Harper knew about furniture. Her parents had spent thousands on custom pieces for their estate. She recognized a master's touch when she saw it. Caleb wasn't just a guy who built things. He was an artist. You like that one? Caleb asked. He had walked up behind her, wiping his hands on his apron. This is incredible. Caleb. The joinery. I've never seen anything this precise. It's for a client downtown. She wanted something that looked like it had been in her family for a century. It's taking me longer than I planned, but walnut is temperamental. You have to listen to it. You didn't mention you were an artist. I'm just a guy who likes wood, Harper, but I appreciate the compliment. Harper looked at him, then back at the cabinet. The disguise she was wearing felt even heavier now. She was pretending to be someone who swept floors, while he was a man who had walked away from a high-powered life to create something beautiful with his hands. They were both hiding, but in different ways. A shadow fell across the shop floor as the side door opened. An older woman with sharp features and a tight floral coat stepped inside. She held a small bag of groceries and looked around the shop with a pinched expression. Caleb? Do you have that shelf repaired yet? She asked, her voice cutting through the quiet. Almost done, Mrs. Higgins. I just need to apply the final coat of wax. Mrs. Higgins walked closer, her eyes landing on Harper. She looked at Harper's scuffed Converse and the sawdust covering her hoodie. She didn't hide her disapproval. She looked back at Caleb and shook her head. Still have this shabby girl hanging around, Caleb? Mrs. Higgins asked, gesturing toward Harper. I saw her at the bus stop the other day. I thought for sure you'd have found someone who could actually buy that poor child a decent set of clothes by now. This one looks like she belongs in a shelter. Harper felt a familiar sting of embarrassment, but she didn't say anything. She just gripped the handle of her broom. Caleb stepped forward. He didn't look angry, but his jaw was set tight. He placed a hand on the walnut cabinet he had been working on. Mrs. Higgins, Harper is a friend, Caleb said. His voice was calm but firm. And honestly, she brings something to this shop that expensive clothes can't buy. She's hardworking and she's kind. To me and to Maya, that's worth more than any designer label. Mrs. Higgins sniffed. Well, I suppose it's your shop. But you're setting a poor example for the girl, Caleb. Appearance matters in this world. Appearance is just the finish, Mrs. Higgins. If the structure underneath is bad, the polish doesn't matter. Harper has a good structure. Mrs. Higgins muttered something about wasted potential and walked out the door. The shop was silent for a moment. Harper looked down at her shoes, feeling the weight of Caleb's defense. Nobody had ever stood up for her like that. Not even the men she had dated who knew her status. Sorry about her, Caleb said. She's lived on this block for 40 years. She thinks she owns the place. It's okay, Harper said. She's not the first person to judge me by my hoodie. Caleb walked over and smiled at her. Her loss. I like the hoodie. It shows you're not afraid to get dirty. Harper smiled back, but her heart was racing. She was starting to realize that the fresh start she wanted wasn't just about a new life. It was about finding someone like Caleb who saw the structure, not just the polish. But as she looked at the masterfully crafted cabinet, she wondered how much longer she could keep her own polish hidden. After Mrs. Higgins left the shop, the silence felt a bit heavy. Caleb hung his leather apron on a heavy iron hook and looked at Harper. He didn't look embarrassed by what the neighbor had said, just a little tired of it. "She has a way of sucking the air out of a room," Caleb said. "I'm starving. How about we grab some burgers at Al's? It's just down the street." "I could definitely go for a burger," Harper replied. "Can I get the extra-large fries, Dad?" Maya asked. "If you finish your burger first, you can have whatever you want," Caleb said. They walked out of the shop and down the block to a small, silver-sided diner. The sign outside was missing a few letters, and the windows were a bit foggy from the heat inside. It was the kind of place Harper's usual social circle wouldn't even park their cars near. Inside, the booths were patched with duct tape, and the air smelled like grilled onions and grease. It felt honest. They sat in a corner booth. Caleb didn't wait for a waiter. He just nodded to the guy behind the counter, and 3 menus appeared a moment later. "So, Harper, do you actually like maintenance work?" Caleb asked. "Or is it just a paycheck for now?" "I like the result," Harper said. "There is something about taking a mess and making it clean. It makes me feel like I have control over at least one part of the world. I get that. That's why I like the shop. The world is messy, but a piece of wood follows the rules of physics. You treat it right, it stays true." "Do you ever miss the firm? The big projects?" "I miss the resources sometimes," Caleb said. "Being able to order the best materials without checking the bank account. But I don't miss the people. Everyone wanted something. Nobody just wanted to build a good house." "I know that feeling," Harper said. "It's hard to find people who don't have an agenda." Maya was busy drawing on the back of a paper placemat. "Dad doesn't have a gender, he just has a hammer." Caleb laughed and ruffled her hair. "Agenda. Maya. It means a secret plan." "Oh. Well, I don't have one either. I just want my fries." The burgers arrived on plastic baskets. They were simple, wrapped in yellow paper, and tasted better than any 5-star meal Harper had eaten in months. They were halfway through their meal when the bell above the door rang. A group of 4 people walked in. Brad was leading the way, his expensive suit looking ridiculous against the wood-paneled walls of the diner. Tiffany was right behind him, holding her nose as if the smell of frying food was a personal insult. 2 other men in business casual attire followed them, laughing at something Brad had just said. "You've got to be kidding me," Brad said, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "Is this where the Ballard locals go to clog their arteries?" "Caleb, I thought you were joking about this place." Caleb didn't look up from his burger. "It's a free country, Brad. Sit wherever you want." Brad walked over to their table, his friends trailing behind like a pack of wolves. He looked at the yellow paper wraps and the plastic baskets. Then he looked at Harper. He stared at her scuffed sneakers and the sawdust that was still stuck to the sleeve of her gray hoodie. "Seriously, Caleb," Brad said. "I know you're trying to live the humble life, but there are limits. You're sitting here with a girl who looks like she just crawled out of a basement." "Brad, leave it alone," Caleb said. Brad reached into his leather wallet. He pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He looked at Harper with a fake look of sympathy and then let the bill slip from his fingers. It fluttered through the air and landed right on top of Harper's foot. "Oops," Brad said. "Keep the change, honey. You look like you need it more than I do. Buy yourself a new hoodie. Or maybe a shower." His friends laughed. Tiffany pulled out her phone and leaned in, as if she were trying to get a close-up of Harper's reaction for a video. Harper felt her hands start to shake under the table. She felt a wave of humiliation that she hadn't felt in years, even though she knew she had millions in the bank. In this moment, Brad's words stung. She felt small. She felt like the person she was pretending to be, and she hated how much power he had to make her feel that way. Caleb didn't yell. He didn't even stand up. He moved with a calm that was almost frightening. He bent down, picked up the $100 bill, and held it out toward Brad. "Take your money, Brad," Caleb said. "Come on, Caleb. It's a tip." Let the girl have it. Caleb stood up then. He wasn't aggressive, but he stood close enough to Brad that the other man had to take a half step back. Caleb held the bill out until Brad finally took it. Cầm lấy tiền của cậu đi, Brad, Caleb said. Nó không mua được sự lịch thiệp đâu. Take your money, Brad. It doesn't buy what you think it does. Brad's face turned a sharp shade of red. He looked around at his friends, then back at Caleb. He tried to come up with a comeback, but Caleb's steady gaze didn't give him an opening. Whatever, Brad muttered. Enjoy your grease. Let's go. Guys, I can't breathe in here. The group turned and walked out, the door slamming shut behind them. The diner went quiet. Even the guy behind the counter was staring. Caleb sat back down. He looked at Harper, his eyes filled with concern. He didn't look at her like she was a shabby girl. He looked at her like she was the only person in the room who mattered. You okay? Caleb asked. Yeah, Harper said. I'm fine. Thanks for doing that. He's a small man, Harper. He uses money because he doesn't have anything else to offer. Don't let him make you feel like you're less than him. I just wasn't expecting it, she said. Maya pushed her basket of fries toward Harper. You can have my extra-large fries. They make me feel better when I'm sad. Harper smiled and took a fry. Thanks, Maya. As she sat there in the duct-taped booth, eating $5 food, Harper felt a sense of safety that her penthouse security system had never provided. She looked at Caleb, who was calmly going back to his burger. She realized that Brad was the poor one in this scenario. Caleb had a richness of spirit that didn't need a Rolex to prove its worth. She wasn't just safe because he was strong. She was safe because he was good. So, Caleb said, is the burger still the best you've had? Actually, Harper said, it's even better now. The walk back from Al's diner was quiet. The rain had stopped, but the air was still damp and cool, leaving a fresh scent over the Ballard streets. Once they reached the shop, Caleb checked his watch and realized Maya had a playdate at Arthur's bookstore, so he dropped her off quickly before heading back to finish the walnut cabinet. You don't have to stay, Caleb said as he pushed the heavy shop door open. I know it's been a long afternoon. I want to help, Harper replied. Besides, I'm not ready to go back to my apartment yet. It's too quiet there. All right, you can help me move these cedar planks to the back wall. They're a bit rough, so be careful. Harper nodded and reached for one of the long, unfinished boards. She was enjoying the physical work. It felt real in a way that spreadsheets and board meetings never did. But as she slid her hand along the side of the wood to get a better grip, a sharp pain shot through her index finger. Ouch, Harper said, pulling her hand back quickly. Caleb was at her side in an instant. He set down the plank he was carrying and reached for her hand. Let me see, Caleb said. It's fine. I just wasn't paying attention. Cedar splinters go deep if you don't catch them. Come over here, under the light. He led her to his workbench. The industrial lamp overhead cast a bright, warm glow over the wood shavings and tools. Caleb reached into a small metal drawer and pulled out a pair of fine-tipped tweezers and a bottle of antiseptic. He took Harper's hand in his. His skin was rough and covered in calluses, but his grip was incredibly gentle. He held her finger firmly to keep it steady. Harper looked down and realized just how close they were. Only a few inches of space remained between them. She could see the steady focus in his eyes and the way his brow furrowed as he worked. Stay still, Caleb said. I'm trying. I see it. It's a long one. Harper watched him. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't annoyed that she had interrupted his work. He was completely focused on her. In her other world, the men she knew would have called a doctor or complained about the delay. Caleb just handled it. He leaned in closer, his face nearly touching hers as he lined up the tweezers. Harper held her breath. She could smell the faint scent of cedar and peppermint on him. The shop was silent except for the distant sound of a car passing by outside. With a quick, precise movement, Caleb pulled the splinter out. He set the tiny sliver of wood on the workbench and grabbed a cotton ball soaked in antiseptic. I've got you. It's out. Just a little scratch, Caleb said. He began to dab the antiseptic on her finger. Harper didn't pull her hand away. She kept looking at him, feeling a strange tightness in her chest. Everything about the afternoon, the way he defended her at the diner, the way he cared for Maya, and now the way he was tending to a tiny wound felt overwhelming. "Why are you so good to me? You don't even know me," Harper asked. Her voice was shaky, and she felt a sudden urge to tell him everything. She wanted to admit that her name was Harper Vance, that she ran Vance Corps, and that she had spent the last year hiding behind a mask because she didn't think anyone could be this kind for no reason. Caleb stopped what he was doing and looked up. He didn't let go of her hand. "I know enough," Caleb answered. "You know what I've told you. You don't know the rest. I know you showed up to a date with a stranger when you were clearly nervous. I know you're great with my daughter. And I know you didn't say a word when Brad was being an idiot, even though I could tell you wanted to." Harper looked down at their joined hands. "I did want to. You have no idea how much. I think I do, but you stayed quiet. You let him talk. That tells me more about who you are than any resume ever could." He reached for a small adhesive bandage and wrapped it carefully around her finger. The silence in the shop was thick and heavy. Harper felt the truth sitting on the tip of her tongue. She thought about her penthouse and the black SUV and the life she had left behind for the day. She thought about how easy it would be to just say the words and end the lie. But then she looked around the shop. She saw the unfinished cabinet, the stacks of wood, and the sawdust on the floor. It was a place where things were built slowly and with honesty. If she told him she was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, the stillness would break. He would see her as another version of Brad, someone with too much power and too many agendas. "I'm not who you think I am, Caleb," Harper whispered. Caleb squeezed her hand one last time before letting go. "Nobody ever is, Harper. We all have parts of ourselves we don't show right away. I'm not in a hurry to find them all out. I'm just glad you're here." He turned back to his workbench and picked up a piece of sandpaper. The moment to confess had passed. Harper stood there for a second, her heart still racing. She felt a mix of relief and a new kind of fear. She was falling for him, and the more she liked him, the harder the truth was going to be. "Want to help me with the wax?" Caleb asked. "Sure," Harper said, forcing a smile. "Just keep me away from the cedar planks for a while." Deal. They spent the next hour working side by side. Caleb showed her how to apply the wax in thin, even coats to the walnut. Harper followed his instructions, focusing on the rhythmic motion of her hands. The guilt was still there, but the quiet peace of the shop was stronger. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the floorboards, Harper realized she had never felt this safe with anyone. Caleb didn't need to know her bank balance to protect her. He didn't need her title to respect her. He was wealthy in ways that Brad could never understand. "That should do it," Caleb said, stepping back to look at the cabinet. "It looks good. It looks amazing, Caleb. Thanks for the help, even with the splinter." Anytime, Harper grabbed her bag and headed for the door. She knew Jordan was probably waiting nearby, but for the first time, she wasn't thinking about the schedule. She was thinking about the bandage on her finger and the man who had put it there. "See you soon?" Caleb asked. "Definitely," Harper replied. She stepped out into the cool evening air. The Seattle drizzle had returned, but she didn't pull her hood up. She just walked toward the corner, feeling the weight of the secret in her pocket and the warmth of Caleb's hand still lingering on her skin. She wasn't ready to tell the truth, but she knew she couldn't keep it hidden forever. For now, the silence was enough. The small bandage Caleb had put on Harper's finger was still there as she sat at her polished mahogany desk on Monday morning. It looked out of place against the expensive stationery and the high-tech tablet. Harper touched the plastic strip every few minutes, ignoring the view of the Seattle skyline behind her. Jordan walked into the office, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. He set a leather-bound folder on her desk and stood with his hands behind his back. "The board is waiting for the quarterly projections," Jordan said, "and the legal team needs your signature on the merger documents." "I'll get to them," Harper replied. "You're distracted, Harper. You've been looking at that bandage for 10 minutes. It's just a splinter, Jordan." "Right. A splinter from a wood shop in Ballard. Arthur called me this morning. He wanted to make sure you got home okay on the bus." Harper finally looked up. "I'm fine. The bus was fine. Arthur thinks Caleb is a good man." I saw the way he stood up for you at the diner. Not many people do that for a woman they think is a maintenance worker. He's different, Harper said. He doesn't want anything from me. He doesn't even know what I have to give. Jordan flipped through the pages in the folder. Speaking of people who want things, we have a list of real estate firms requesting a meeting for the new downtown project. One firm has been very persistent. They've called 4 times this morning. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. Harper looked down and saw the name Bradshaw and Associates. At the top of the list was Brad's full name. Brad, Harper whispered. He wants a piece of the Vance Core development, Jordan said. He has no idea that the shabby girl he insulted at the diner is the person who decides if his firm lives or dies this year. I have the paperwork right here to reject his bid permanently. One stroke of your pen, and he's finished. Harper picked up her fountain pen. The gold nib hovered over Brad's name. She thought about the way he had dropped that $100 bill on her foot. She thought about the sneer on his face and the way he had insulted Caleb's life. It would be so easy to crush him. It would be satisfying to see the look on his face when he realized who she was. But then she remembered the stillness of the woodshop. She remembered Caleb's voice telling her that Brad was a small man who used money because he had nothing else. If she used her power to hurt him, she was just playing his game. She was bringing the noise and the drama of her CEO life into the peace she had found with Caleb. No, Harper said. She set the pen down. No? Jordan asked. He was terrible to you, Harper. He deserves to lose the contract. He doesn't deserve my energy, Jordan. If his firm is the best for the job, the committee will hire him. Nếu không, họ sẽ không. I'm not going to use my position to settle a personal score. That's a big change for you. It's a better way to live. She took the proposal and tucked it into the back of her desk drawer. She didn't want to think about Brad anymore. She didn't want to be the woman who decided people's fates from a skyscraper. I'm leaving for the day, Harper announced. It's only 11 o'clock. You have 3 meetings. Cancel them. Tell them I have an off-site inspection. Harper stood up and walked to the small private bathroom attached to her office. She looked in the mirror and saw the CEO. She was wearing a $2,000 suit and diamond earrings that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. She reached up and unclipped the earrings, setting them on the marble counter. She opened her hidden locker and pulled out the gray hoodie and the old jeans. She stripped out of the suit, feeling the expensive fabric fall to the floor. When she pulled the oversized hoodie over her head, she felt her shoulders finally drop. She grabbed the keys Caleb had lent her the night before. His truck had been making a strange noise, and she had offered to take it to a friend's shop to get it looked at. It was a lie, but it gave her a reason to keep the old vehicle. "You're taking the truck?" Jordan asked as she walked back into the office. "It's in the parking garage," Harper said. "I'm going to Ballard." "You look like a completely different person, Harper." "I feel like a different person." She took the private elevator down to the garage. The black SUV was there, but she walked past it to the corner where Caleb's beat-up truck sat. It looked out of place among the Ferraris and Mercedes. Harper climbed into the cab. The interior smelled like cedar and old leather. When she turned the key, the engine rumbled loudly, vibrating through the steering wheel. She shifted into gear and drove out into the city traffic. The drive to Ballard took longer than usual, but she didn't mind. She liked the way the truck felt. It was loud and slow and honest. As she crossed the bridge and saw the industrial buildings, the pressure of the city seemed to fade away. She pulled up in front of Miller's Timber and sat there for a moment. She could see Caleb through the window. He was standing at his workbench, his back to the door, working on a new piece of wood. Maya was at her desk, coloring with her head down. Harper looked at her hands. She had removed the bandage, leaving a small red mark where the splinter had been. It was healing. She stepped out of the truck and walked toward the door. She wasn't thinking about mergers or real estate contracts. She wasn't thinking about Brad or the board of directors. She was just thinking about the smell of sawdust and the sound of the folk radio. She chose the peace of the shop over the drama of the office. She pushed the door open and listened for the bell. The bell above the door gave its usual light chime as Harper stepped into the shop. Caleb didn't look up from the lathe immediately, but he waved a hand to acknowledge her. He was covered in a fine layer of sawdust, his flannel shirt tucked into a heavy leather apron. Harper didn't say anything. She just walked to the back, grabbed a stool, and watched him work until the sun went down and the rain started to drum against the roof. "Maya's wiped out," Caleb said, nodding toward the small staircase that led to the loft above the shop. "We spent the afternoon moving lumber. She thinks she's a pro now." "I can imagine," Harper said. Caleb turned off the shop lights and grabbed a lantern. "Come on, let's get upstairs." The loft was small, tucked right under the rafters. It smelled like cedar and old books. Maya was already fast asleep in an oversized, beat-up armchair, her sketchbook resting on her chest. The rain was heavy now, a loud, steady rhythm that made the small space feel like an island in the middle of the city. Caleb sat on the edge of the low sofa and picked up a thick book on architecture. Harper didn't take the seat next to him. Instead, she sat on the rug at his feet, leaning her back against his legs and resting her head on his knee. Caleb didn't say a word. He just opened his book and began to read, his left hand naturally finding its way to her hair. He ran his fingers through the strands, untangling the knots from the day. It was a simple, repetitive motion that made Harper's eyes heavy. For a long time, the only sounds were the rain and the turning of pages. Harper stared at the dark wood of the floorboards. She thought about her penthouse, her board of directors, and the quarterly reports waiting on her desk. They felt like they belonged to someone else. "Caleb?" Harper said. "Yeah? I have to tell you something. I should have told you a long time ago." Caleb didn't stop moving his hand. He didn't tense up. "I'm listening. I'm not a maintenance worker, and I don't take the bus because I have to." Harper took a breath, her heart thumping against her ribs. "Actually, I'm a millionaire. I'm the CEO of Vance Corps, the office I told you about. I own the whole building." The hand in her hair paused for a second, then went back to its rhythmic pace. Caleb didn't pull away. He didn't ask her why she lied. He didn't get up in a fit of anger. "I figured it was something like that," Caleb said. Harper shifted so she could look up at him. "You did? How? You have very expensive taste in coffee for someone who scrubs floors. And Arthur isn't exactly subtle when he tries to set people up. He kept telling me you were important, in a way that didn't sound like cleaning. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I liked the person who was sweeping my shop. I figured you had your reasons for the hoodie and the smudge on your cheek. I was tired of people only seeing the bank account," Harper said. "I wanted to see if someone could just like me. I think we've established that I do." Caleb closed his book and set it on the small table next to the chair. "Does being a millionaire change the way you feel about being here tonight?" "No," Harper replied. "If anything, it makes me want to be here more. Then the money doesn't matter to me. It's just another piece of the puzzle. I'm not Brad, Harper. I don't care about your portfolio. I care that Maya asks about you every morning before she even has breakfast. I love her, Caleb. I love both of you." "I know." Caleb reached down and took her hand. His skin was still rough, stained with a bit of wood dust and oil from the day's work. He didn't look at her like she was a CEO. He didn't look at her with greed or even surprise. He just looked at her with the same steady, quiet kindness he had shown since the first day at the coffee shop. The rain continued to hammer against the windows, a gray blur against the Seattle night. Outside, the city was full of people chasing titles, power, and the next big win. Brad was probably at some high-end bar, trying to impress someone with his Rolex. The board of directors at Vance Corps was likely wondering why their CEO was missing. None of it reached the loft. Here, there were no labels. There was no CEO and no struggling father. There were just 3 people in a wood shop, safe from the storm. Caleb leaned down, his face close to hers. "You okay?" Harper reached up and grabbed his hand. She took his palm, the one still dusted with fine particles of oak, and pressed it firmly against her cheek. She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him and the shop. "I'm home," Harper said. She didn't need to explain anything else. She didn't need to justify the lie or promise it would never happen again. They both knew the truth, now. The secret was out, but it hadn't changed the foundation of what they had built. It was just a fact, like the grain in a piece of wood. Caleb leaned his head against hers. They sat there in the silence, watching Maya sleep while the rain washed over the city. High above the industrial streets of Ballard, the light in the woodshop window stayed on. It was a small, warm glow tucked between the towering steel and glass of the rising skyscrapers. Inside, the world was quiet and simple. They were together, anchored by an emotional bond that didn't need words or status to survive. They were safe. They belonged to each other. And for Harper Vance, that was the only truth that finally mattered. And that is our bedtime story for tonight. This journey reminds us that the most valuable things in life, true peace, safety, and a love that understands us, cannot be bought with a bank account or a title. Through single dad stories like Caleb's, we learn that real wealth is found in the honesty of our hands and the depth of our character. Caleb, as a devoted single dad, showed Harper that structure matters much more than polish, and that home isn't a place, but a person who sees your hidden crown. We would love to know how this story made you feel. Do you believe that love can truly bridge two such different worlds? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end. Your support allows us to keep sharing these heartwarming single dad tales. May you find a connection that is as real and as quiet as the woodshop in Ballard. Good night, and sleep well.